Today's show features Dr. Evisha Ford, founder of the I Can Dream Center. I am so excited to be sitting here with Dr. Evisha Ford, the founder of the I Can Dream Center here in Chicago. Thank you so much for joining the One Girl Revolution podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
I'm so excited to have you on to tell your story and talk about the incredible work that you're doing here in Chicago. But before we get into that, I would love to know, who is a One Girl Revolution? Who is a woman or girl that's inspired you in your life?
I am so fortunate to have so many inspirations. I come from a huge tribe of women. So I have 5 first cousins, 2 sisters, and I think the inspiration for all of them is my grandmother. She came to Chicago from the South under duress and came here and built a life and a legacy as an older woman, and just showed us strength and tenacity and really instilled in us just the value of family and relationship and faith. And so as a young girl, it was interesting because I really definitely had a very love-hate relationship with my grandmother, but I understand her so much more as an adult and so appreciate the path that she paved for us and her legacy in our family. So
I feel like that's so many women and girls with their moms and grandmothers. It's like you have a really hard time with them, but then you really appreciate everything that they've done for you.
Absolutely.
So I want to rewind and talk about your early life, just a little bit about who you are, where you're from. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your story.
Sure. I'm born and raised in Chicago, moved to the southwest suburbs as a young girl. So I did all of my schooling in the southwest suburbs. And I'd like to say that even though I'm a suburbanite, I've always had an urban soul. So the first thing I did when I got my license at 16 was drive to the city. So my mom was like, "Where are you?" And I'm like, "I'm on the north side." So I've always had that curiosity about the urban matters and just really global affairs. So I went to school, undergrad, Quincy University, and went to U of I, Fighting Illini for grad school. Really spent most of I graduated from high school when I was 16, and so I left Chicago pretty early, but have always had an affinity for sort of global affairs and things of the world. I was an exchange student in Argentina when I was in high school.
Oh, cool.
And really have always been interested in what's happening around the world. And I'll say one of the things that really set a tone in my life is that my father passed away before I went to high school. And so that really, it was a difficult time for sure, because my mom lost her dad and her husband in the same summer, which was really quite a hit for our family. But it really gave me a different sense of my own resiliency and ability to overcome, and just a different level of empathy for the world around me, and maybe even the opportunity to shed a little level of like bratty entitlement that all preteens have. So it feels good. Yeah.
So would you say all of those things kind of led you to social work, or what was it that kind of led you to get into social work?
Absolutely, absolutely. I realized during the time that I was really processing that loss and going through that, that a lot of times I felt really alone at that time. And so I'm often asked, like, what do you want to do when you were a little girl? What was your career choice? And I never could think of a career choice, but I always wanted to open an orphanage. And so what I've understood is that what my real desire is that I wanted children and young people to always have what they needed. And I felt like during that time of grief that maybe I didn't have all the resources that I needed to kind of get through that tough time. And so a seed was planted around like making sure to fill the gaps for people. So yes, that time was really super important in my story, and really where I am today.
And you're a doctor.
Yes.
Is that a doctor in social work?
It's actually a doctorate in educational administration. So I have a superintendent's endorsement.
Oh, amazing.
Yes. And at one point, I sort of toyed with the idea of the superintendency. I actually worked for 5 years as an assistant superintendent, and realized that there was an opportunity to make a bigger impact at the I Can Dream Center in a separate organization. And I certainly took all the tools and all the things I gained from my years in leadership in public schools and sort of poured that in, and of using that in running the I Can Dream Center.
So I'm always interested in the spark moment. I feel like we have so many spark moments in our lives, light bulb moments, whatever people want to call them. What was the spark moment that led to the I Can Dream Center? When did you know that that needed to be something that didn't already exist?
That's an interesting question. So I'll tell you about the spark moment, but the original seed was planted because when I entered public school space, I first started working in early childhood. The program I worked with at that time is now called Preschool for All. So the governor saw the model that we were using in this program and said, you know what, we want this in the entire state of Illinois. One of the things I recognized in really supporting teachers and families on the south and west side of the city is that there were really like gaps in services for kiddos in those areas. And I began to understand a little bit differently sort of disparities in different communities. So the seed was planted that there's something that needs to be done here. Fast forward about 15 years and maybe 10 years. And I was working in a high school district, and I built several programs. I built a program for students who had finished high school and needed some more services before they were ready to exit the school system. I built several programs for individuals with like emotional disabilities, and that was actually the focus of my research study is like what programmatic features are important for these students that struggle with emotional disabilities, namely to be successful. And so students, the bad kids have always been sort of my passion and my interest. And so I think probably my 5th year in the high school district, I presented to the leader there, the superintendent there, hey, I have this idea, because what I was noticing is that the students who had disabilities, mild disabilities, learning disabilities, some behavioral issues, high functioning autism, there was a pretty significant number of them that were falling through the cracks. And so a student who has a disability is probably not going to get a GED. They're probably not going to pass a GED test, or they not necessarily because of the academic or intellectual capacity, but because of the other skills that are needed to get through a program like that. So I'll just say that. Long story short, I came in, I had this idea for this program. I had built at least 5 programs for students with disabilities at that time. I'd saved the district probably about $30 million. And so I had a model that I could replicate. And I was told no because of the optics of it. It was during a negotiation year. And I was told that it wouldn't present the right picture if we were hiring at a time when we were sending the message that we needed to trim our budget. And so at that point, I thought about it and I said, well, I know how to do it. And so there was the I Can Dream Center. So our initial program was to support students. So I had that conversation in maybe April, and the next March, the I Can Dream Center opened.
That's incredible. And you're doing so much more. And maybe that had to happen in order for you to be doing all the incredible work that you're doing now. So for people that are listening, what is the I Can Dream Center?
So the I Can Dream Center started as a disability service organization, and namely we provide education. So we're a private therapeutic school, a day school. And our focus, our niche is really on students who have mild to moderate disabilities and have the capacity to work in competitive employment. These students are really sometimes forgotten about, right? Like they don't have the significant disabilities that they'd be placed in certain programs, but still need some support before they're ready to adult, right? So that's our claim, is we teach students how to adult. We also support students who haven't quite done well in the public school system because of emotional barriers, sometimes social, sometimes anxiety, a lot of school phobias and avoidance. And so we're able to create a small environment so those students can thrive. And most recently, in September, we opened an early childhood program. So we're actually serving the littles, which is where I started out my public school career. And so that was so important for me to circle back and offer programming for those youngsters too. So we have a secondary program for students who may be struggling to finish high school credits. And then we also have a transition program, which students with disabilities are eligible for services until they're 22. So we service them until they're no longer eligible for services and really help them holistically with job skills, vocational skills. We place them in internships in the community. teach them how to buy cars, rent apartments, everything you can think of that you might need to be an independent adult, and just give them that extra boost that they might need. So we just partnered, and now we have an on-site CNA training program. And so students who come to us who are interested in the medical field can take the classes in a way that's slightly modified to meet their learning demands, and they're eligible to sit for the CNA exam, and then we connect them with employers once they're finished. So
wow, that's just incredible. And I think it's so powerful what you shared there, how they're a lot of times somebody just needs a shot, or they just need resources. Or I shared with you before we started that my brother has a type of autism, and so I very personally connected to the work that you are doing. And he actually just got his PhD from Penn State.
Wow,
and he jokes that it's because he had sisters that challenged him and communicated with him and like helped him with his communication skills. But a lot of times it's people and kids definitely just need somebody to pay attention to them and just give them the resources and support that they need.
Absolutely, to wrap them in support. And so the other unique thing about I Can Dream Center is just what you said. Like, your brother was successful because he had family. And so one of our really important to us is that one of our core values is that we, as a staff, we relate to each other like family. Not like a staff, but also we like to extend that to the families, the students and their families who are part of the I Can Dream Center. And so we're always looking to resource the parents and to figure out what is it that you need and how can we really partner with you on the journey. We've never opened a new program without the persistent plea from a parent that it was needed and there was a gap. And so we just listen. We've had our ear to the ground for parents and families to say, how can we help you? What is needed? So,
well, it's cool to see it continue to grow and evolve. And I'm sure you could write so many books about all the different stories and people that you've encountered through your work. But I would love to hear a couple of stories. If there are a couple of kids that have gone through your program or families that have been involved, can you share a couple of stories?
Absolutely. So my very favorite story is of a student who came to us when we first opened our school program. She was probably in our first or second cohort of students. Lots of academic potential, just needed some social support. And what's happened is that she came to us and just got a little bit of boost, and we helped her, I think, as she was starting her first semester of college. She's since completed her associate's degree in early childhood, and that student is actually now our colleague. So she was hired back at the I Can Dream Center as a early childhood teacher assistant.
That's awesome. That's so great.
That's obviously my favorite story. So if we can, create more colleagues, that's great. And so she contacted me and said, Dr. Ford, I want to work with students who have the same kind of struggles that I had. Where should I start? And I was like, you should submit your resume, of course. So it's been great. So
that must be a really cool thing for you to see things kind of come full circle like that, where you might help a child or their family member, or they come through your program and then they help somebody else, or maybe they find ways that they can innovate and help their peers.
Absolutely. We've seen that replicated in so many different ways. We have a student who came to us, and his needs are probably more significant than the typical student that we would take, but his mom was completely out of options and places. And so we said, okay, come on. So it's been a joy to have him at the center. But what's been most amazing is to see our other students to rise up and to support him in such a way. So he has all these peer buddies that we certainly didn't assign. And so he has friends, and his mom is just amazed at the transformation that he's made since he's been with us. And we are too. We just love him, and it'll be sad when he ages out. So
yeah. Do you stay in touch with a lot of the kids that come through?
We do. They're family, and so we have. We are grateful. We fundraise to do what's called a Saturday experience about once a month. Sometimes it's more frequently. And what that is an opportunity for parents to have a little respite, a little break, but also students with disabilities aren't necessarily invited to the same sort of social gatherings that typically developing people are. And so we created the Saturday experience to give our students a chance to try on all the new social skills and things that we're teaching, but also just to have fun. I mean, I have more fun probably at the Saturday experiences than anybody. We have a annual autism awareness glow up party. It's a silent party. It's glow in the dark, and
Cool.
I think I'm sweating more than anybody by the end of the night. But so we have that Saturday experience, and it's been really good for the parents and the students, and just an opportunity to have weekend things for them to do outside of the normal school day. And I actually forgot the question you asked me that made me start talking about that. So what did you ask me?
I just asked if you stayed in touch with everybody.
So that's what so a lot of our alumni come back to our Saturday experiences, depending on, I mean, it's been hard during the pandemic, of course, because we have to limit numbers and make sure that we are in a space so we can socially distance. But yeah, we see our alumni a lot at the Saturday experiences. They come back, they join us for rock climbing and costume parties and bake-offs and all kind of fun stuff that we do on the weekends. So, yeah.
How is, I know everybody is constantly talking about the pandemic, so not to harp on COVID, but I'm so curious, like, were there any changes or innovative things that happened for the I Can Dream Center? Because obviously when COVID hit, so many places got shut down. We didn't really know how long it would last. So I'm sure that there were maybe a positive thing that came out of it, or a program that you didn't expect to have that came through it. Is there any positive thing that came from the pandemic for you guys?
That's so funny, because we thought we'd be closed for 2 weeks, and so we'd be back in business after a couple of weeks, which is kind of funny. We actually moved during the pandemic, which is interesting to be moving into a new location. So the good thing that happened for us is that we were able to negotiate a really great contract on a new space. And so it was such a divine order in the way that things happened, because we needed to move by July 1, and I'd been looking, I hadn't quite seen anything, and I found a location which is amazing. It's a former satellite college campus, and so it's perfect for our students. It was perfect, but we were able to negotiate a really great contract because of that. But also, we quadrupled in size, so we were actually able to still be in person in August when the option was given. We chose to be in person because our students have disabilities. They're at the end of their eligibility. They're vulnerable, and there are so many reasons that we just thought it's best that we do return. But it was great because our classroom spaces are huge, and talk about needing to be 6 feet. We have lots of space to spread out. So the timing of our move couldn't have been more perfect to create more opportunity to actually gather in a space. So it was great.
That's great.
And we've partnered with more school districts who send students to us because they realize that our students are not thriving in the remote learning environment. So
that was one of the hardest things, I think, throughout the pandemic, is these kids, not being able to go to school, and especially if they have any kind of special needs, it was so difficult for them to just pay attention. I have a hard enough time paying attention on Zoom, and so for Zoom conferences, and so I can't even fathom for children. So I think it's just so important, the work that you do, more than ever, and we saw that so clearly over the past year.
Yeah, it's been great. The one thing I will say too is I learned a ton about my team during this time. So we went remote when we had to, until it was safer to come back, and I was just so amazed at the team of folks who are part of our dream team, who just really were there for our families, who when they were dropping off food to our families, and this isn't anything that I asked nor orchestrated nor necessarily expected, but they were dropping off food to our families, and they were still offering in-home supports for our students who had the most significant needs. They were really just making sure to create spaces for our students to have some social connection. And again, this is above and beyond anything that I asked. And so I always say that in tough times, when people get squeezed, you get to see what's on the inside. And so I was pretty happy. So.
We saw a lot of good things coming out of people throughout the pandemic, and I loved seeing that. I think at first, people were so focused on themselves and their families and just surviving and taking care of the people around them. But then it was so beautiful to see people start to look outside of their own circle and say, who are the people that are in need right now, and how can I help them?
Right. Absolutely.
How do students and their families get connected to you? I'm sure it's a whole variety of different ways.
It is, yeah, and growing. So most of the students we serve, particularly in our secondary and our transition program, come through the school district. So the school districts will refer them. But increasingly, we have parents that are scouting out their own programs and finding us. And so more and more parents are contacting us direct and saying, hey, this is the presentation of my student or my child. How can you help? Can you serve them? And then we're looping the school district in and say, hey, this parent's interested. And so that's namely it. I think we have a pretty good interactive sort of social media presence. And so what we find is depending on the platform, the students are the ones who are interacting, especially the secondary students who want to come for transition. They've already said, hey, I can't wait to start at I Can Dream. It's like, oh, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
They probably, I think so many kids, they struggle with feeling like they fit in and finding their community. And so really that's what you've become, and that's what you're becoming for so many of these kids.
Yeah, it's exciting. Last year in November, during the pandemic, we hosted our first ever vocational conference. And so what happens is if you're typically developing, you probably go on college tours or you go and look for which university you'll go to. But we know there's a whole group of students that aren't ready to, or maybe not appropriate for university because of their disability. And so we hosted this conference for parents and for students to sort of say, here's your options. Here's an option for you after you finish high school. And we had really great workshops and different vocational tracks and all sorts of things. And the students just absolutely loved it. And we had a little mixer, a social distance mixer in the middle of the day during lunch. And so it was a fun day. And I love being able to help students dream and expand what they thought was possible for themselves after they finished high school.
So speaking of dreaming, where does I Can Dream Center go from here? And I love like big dreams. So like even 5 or 10 years from now, money's not an option. What does I Can Dream Center look like?
I Can Dream Center in 5 years, with your parameters, is really expanding across the Midwest for sure, and the U.S. in the model that we have. So we're really in several neighborhoods and communities across the U.S. and supporting practitioners to be able to support the students that we love better, but also creating a space to be able to teach this very unique niche of students how to be independent as adults.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I know that you have a couple of things that you're working on right now. By the time that this episode comes out, can you talk about some of those things?
Sure. So we're super excited to be partnering and creating a cookbook with our students. Culinary arts is such an important part of what we do every week because it levels the playing field. This is a quick story. We had a student who was a selective mute, and the only time we would hear her speak was during culinary arts when she was cooking. And so her parents alerted us that she's selectively mute, but she will speak in the kitchen. And so we said, well, great, then she needs to be in culinary arts a few times a week. And so we really got a chance to know her. And so that was really just a microcosm of the way that we see our students really come into themselves when they are in the space where they can be learning tactilely and creating and really taking some of the other math and science lessons that they're using in the kitchen. So we hatched this idea to create this cookbook, and we contacted a celebrity chef and said, hey, can you lend us your celebrity for our cookbook? And he was great. He was happy to do so, and so we're super excited. We think that will be finished by fall. So we've been working on it since January.
That's so cool. I can't wait to promote it. And One Girl will totally be watching everything that you're doing and promoting things as it comes out. And I can't wait to see where you go from here. I want to ask you a question more about you, a personal question. At the root, I'm always curious, like about the root of where your work comes from. So if you had to go to the very root of who you are, what you stand for, and the work that you do at the I Can Dream Center, what is that?
I think who I am as a person is really committed to empowering and amplifying voices of the marginalized. And so I kind of joked, and you asked me at the beginning, like, sort of who am I, and sort of where I came from. But I was actually one of the bad kids at school. So shout out to all the girls who always got a check mark for doesn't follow directions or talks too much. So that was me in school. And so I am so grateful for the people that sort of, the teachers and the folks that came alongside me and said, hey, you're multidimensional. You're not just this naughty girl who likes to talk and run the classroom. There's more to you. And so I love really being able to help people to pull that from themselves, to be able to recognize, like, there's a purpose in you. How can I help you to touch that? So for me, I am constantly doing that with the leaders in my organization. I'm coaching them. I'm trying to get to what's the purpose and how are you manifesting that in this role, with a thought process that will pour down to our teachers, and then that will pour down to our students, so that they can really get connected with their why, right? And they can show up every day and be willing to, like, live out of that. So that's in a nutshell.
If there's a kid listening right now who maybe is the bad kid in school, or maybe they don't feel seen or heard, or they're just completely marginalized, what would you say to them?
I would say to embrace those mistakes. And so there's been a lot of talk about growth mindset, which I didn't know there was a name to it. It's interesting because I was having a conversation with my cousin, and I said, I've always had innately in me this desire to want to learn from other people's lived experiences. So I thought I didn't necessarily have to go through something to know that it was real or was a thing, right? And so I would probably say to the bad kids to really lean in to the voices of the people that care about you, and to pull from what they're pouring into you and what they're willing to pour into you. But also to embrace mistakes, because the things, as a recovering perfectionist, I can say that the things that have been failures have shaped who I am today, and I'm grateful for them, right? The struggles, right? So having gone through the grief, loss of a parent at an early age, having been told no, that I couldn't start this program for students that I was concerned were going to drop out of school and into the criminal justice system, being told that I didn't have a seat at certain tables is really what got me to this point. So being able to really embrace mistakes and know that all of those are part of a path and a journey, and really looking to grow from them. And yeah.
How has you have so many different stories. Your life has been a journey, and I feel like life is always a journey. How has the I Can Dream Center and your work, how has it changed your life?
That's a good question. So one of my favorite quotes that I love, my spiritual director said it to me, and it just really stuck like glue, is that your vocation is not what you do, it's who you are. And so I've always been, the pieces of the I Can Dream Center have always been inside of me. So I feel like taking that courageous leap to walk in full-time entrepreneurship as the founding executive director was really, has grown my faith, and also made me feel like a more integrated and whole person, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. All the career steps and roles that I had before coming to the I Can Dream Center were very necessary, and they created the foundation and the framework, to be clear. But walking in this purpose and being able to provide for families what doesn't exist, it just makes me feel like a whole person, like a real person, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Not like I'm getting up and putting on myself to go into a role, but really I wake up already fully myself when I go to the I Can Dream Center. It doesn't feel like work to me. It's just an extension of my life. So
since we're not there, since you brought it up, we're not there, paint a picture for me of the I Can Dream Center. When I walk in the front door, what do you feel? What would I feel?
Well, what I feel is warmth, and what the feedback that I've gotten consistently is that it's a peaceful place. And so one of the things that I've been told on a few different occasions is that when people are there, they're inspired about the possibilities. And sometimes it's looking at any of the success stories of our students. Sometimes it's looking at the nerve of somebody to say, hey, I'm going to take this program, my program on the road. But for whatever reason, what people feel is a sense of opportunity and possibility, that's the word, but also a peaceful sense. But when you walk in, you'll see bright colors and clean lines and inspirational messages here and there and some really cool pictures of our kids. They love the camera, so we're capturing that every time we can, and a space where you feel comfortable.
That's beautiful. I can't wait to come visit one
Yes,
day. And
looking
everybody
forward
who's
to it.
listening, I hope that they come visit as well. For people that are listening, how can they get involved and how can they support the work that you're doing at the I Can Dream Center?
Absolutely. So because of our plan to replicate our model, we definitely need corporate sponsors and people to come alongside us in the work that we're doing. We are always looking for vocational speakers. So every Friday, our goal is to expose our students to different career opportunities, but more so to really drive home the message that whatever personal barriers that you've had to overcome are not barriers to your success. And so we're always looking for speakers to come and talk to our students virtually now or in person. We're looking for also volunteers for our Saturday experience. So on occasion, we have had people to say, hey, I know how to knit. Would you like to knit? Or we had one organization, I should remember the name of it at this moment, but what they did was they came and they let our students to make blankets, and then we distributed them to people that didn't have to homeless people. And so it ended up being such a great opportunity for our students. So so we're looking for corporate sponsors, vocational speakers, and volunteers, and people who can partner with us. The other thing we want to do, in the same way that we've added a CNA program, we want to add a C++ program for our students. We used to offer a coding class, and our coding teacher relocated, but we'd like to bring that back because there's such an open field for students with autism and coding. And so we'd like to be able to offer that to our students, so when they leave, they can really be eligible for all these job openings. So
That's really cool.
yeah.
And I want to encourage everybody to follow you on social media. I'm sure that people can donate to the work that you're doing. So it's always the little things. I tell people often that it doesn't even take money to support the great work of different people. And so people can follow you and share the work that you're doing and buy the cookbook when it comes out.
Yes.
And then what about people in their own communities? So people who live in Detroit or they live anywhere across the country or around the world, what would you say to them? How can they emulate the work that you're doing? Even just in little ways, even just being there for marginalized children.
You know, so I spoke at the Pan-African Autism Conference in April of 2019. And I really had to think about that question that you just asked me. Like, how do we replicate this model all over the world? And it is easily replicable. You can replicate it easily. And so one of the things that is really a common thread throughout the organizations that I've talked to in Africa and the Middle East, but also right here, is that there has to be high expectations for students, and that we have to meet them at the point of their individuality, which is really sort of difficult in a public school setting at times. But I think really figuring out who students are and connecting with them, building relationships, and saying, what is it that you're interested in doing, and trying to set them up with opportunities to try that. I mean, I think about going to undergrad. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to study. I was always social justice minded. And I had this aha moment in this social work class one time, and I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to give students as many opportunities to have those aha moments as possible. So we place students in community job settings, but we don't have them all doing maintenance work. And that's not to say that there's anything that's not honorable about that work, but I think students have different interests. And so we don't have just a few sites where all the students go work. No, we have 30 community partners. So if they want to work with animals, or they want to work in retail or in childcare and come back and be our colleague, or hair care, there's a number of different industries. And so we try to expose our students to that which they've expressed interest in, or what we've noticed in them that they may not even notice in themselves. So I think in summation, I think building relationships with students, giving them opportunities, and having really high expectations for their ability when they're given those opportunities, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. Well, it's been such a gift to spend time with you, Dr. Ford. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. But before I let you go, I always end this podcast with one question. And it may be connected to some other things that you talked about, because I feel like this entire time has been all about dreaming and big dreams and empowerment. But I always ask, if you could leave women and girls around the world with one message, what would it be?
To dream bigger. I think we come up with things that we can kind of see and hold, and especially if you are recovering perfectionists like me. But I think that oftentimes we have to just even dream bigger than to the point where it may even make us a little nervous or fearful. So I think if you can imagine something, then you have the capacity to make that happen. And I think sometimes we don't know that, or we don't reinforce that to this next generation enough. Sometimes out of our own fear, but also I just think really just telling them to dream bigger, to imagine it, to write down your goals, to articulate them, tell them to somebody. So.
And we can be a good example too to the younger generations. If we dream bigger, the other generations will dream bigger. And just like you said, encouraging young people, if they have a dream, to go for it.
Absolutely.
And don't be held back by fear or fear of failure.
Yes, absolutely. All that.
Dr. Ford, thank you so much for being on the One Girl Evolution podcast, and thank you for all the incredible work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm grateful and humbled to do the work. Thank you.